The lights in the studio were deceptively warm, the kind of glow designed to make everything look softer than it really was. The crowd was electric with anticipation, clapping rhythmically as the cameras rolled and the music faded. Stephen Colbert, sitting confidently behind his desk, offered his usual quick-witted grin to the audience. But beneath the polish of his trademark charisma was something more pointed tonight, something calculating. Why had he invited Karoline Leavitt, the former White House press aide turned firebrand political commentator, onto his show? And more importantly, what did he think would happen? Did he expect her to stumble under the glare of national television? Was this meant to be a moment of public embarrassment wrapped in late-night satire? Or did he underestimate her entirely? Karoline walked onto the stage poised, her stride deliberate and unfazed. She didn't wear the nervousness that often betrayed guests on live television. No sweaty palms, no forced smile. Just sharp eyes scanning the room, and a slight nod to the cheering crowd. Something told the audience right then. This wouldn't be a typical segment. The opening moments were cordial enough, Colbert tossing in a few harmless jabs carefully dipped in humor. But as the conversation turned political, the tone changed. The audience leaned forward. Was this just entertainment? Or were they about to witness something raw and unscripted? "So, Karoline," Colbert began, a smirk tugging at the corners of his mouth, "when you were a spokesperson for an administration known more for chaos than clarity, did you ever think you'd end up defending it on my show?" The question landed like a gauntlet dropped on the studio floor. Laughter erupted, but there was an undertone, unease. He was baiting her. Karoline didn't flinch. She let the silence breathe for a second, then leaned in. "Stephen," she said coolly, "when you spend every night turning politics into a punchline, do you ever worry you're part of the problem instead of the solution?" The audience gasped. The dynamic had shifted. This wasn't going to be an easy takedown for the host. The crowd, still loyal to their nightly jester, fell. Quiet. What would come next? Would he double down? Would she crack? Colbert raised his eyebrows. The smirk faded ever so slightly. He fired back, accusing her of spinning facts and dodging questions like a trained puppet from the Trump era. The crowd cheered again, sensing their guy had regained footing. But Karoline had come prepared. She turned her body toward him fully, no longer treating this like a guest segment but a battleground of ideas. "I don't hide behind monologues or laugh tracks," she said, voice unwavering. "If you want a real debate, let's have it. But don't pretend I'm the one evading truth when half your audience thinks comedy is journalism." There it was, a direct hit. And it showed. Now the air was thick with tension. Was this still entertainment? Or was this something else entirely? The next words from Colbert's mouth would define everything that followed. The silence after Karoline's challenge was almost cinematic. For a split second, even the ever-poised Colbert looked caught off guard. His grin flickered, not quite fading but twisting into something more measured, less playful, more cautious. The cameras, still rolling, captured every twitch of his jaw, every calculated blink. He was still the host, yes, but it was no longer his stage alone. Colbert leaned back slightly, crossing one leg over the other, posture shifting into that familiar pseudo-casual pose he often used before dropping rhetorical bombs. "That's cute," he said, tapping his note cards. "But if I recall correctly, you were defending a president who had trouble distinguishing facts from feelings, and now you're here telling us you're the voice of truth? Forgive me if that feels a little disingenuous," the audience chuckled. But this time the laugh didn't land with the same confidence. There was a tension creeping in, the kind that made viewers uncertain if they were laughing with Colbert or nervously watching a confrontation spiral beyond his control. Karoline didn't even blink. "That's your problem, Stephen," she said calmly. "You think smirking through complex issues makes you smarter than the people actually trying to solve them. You can't dismiss every opponent with a joke and expect it to count as a rebuttal." The studio was dead silent. Colbert started to interject, but she wasn't finished. You sit here every night pretending to hold people accountable. But who holds you accountable when your narrative leaves out inconvenient truths? You talk about misinformation while profiting from half the story. The audience began to shift. Some murmured, a few clapped, others just watched, wide-eyed, realizing they were no longer witnessing a comedy segment. This was a live, unscripted dismantling. A guest had walked into a den of mockery and refused to play by its rules. Colbert regrouped, trying to pivot. So are you saying the media shouldn't ask tough questions? Or just that we shouldn't ask them to you? Karoline leaned in, unshaken. Ask every question you want, but ask them to everyone, not just the people you dislike politically. If you were as committed to truth as you are to applause, you'd be asking why half the country feels unheard, not just laughing at them. The words hung in the air like smoke, and they stung. The audience wasn't sure how to react now. They had come expecting entertainment, maybe a roast, maybe even a political dunking. What they were getting instead was exposure, a hard, uncomfortable light turned back on the host and everything he represented. Colbert shifted again, glancing at the producers. They weren't cutting to commercial yet. Not because they didn't want to, but because the moment was too magnetic to interrupt. The energy in the studio had flipped. What was supposed to be satire had transformed into scrutiny. The guest was rewriting the script live, and the audience could feel it. Karoline wasn't just surviving the segment, she was controlling it. She spoke without notes, without hesitation, and without flinching under the bright, judgmental lights of late-night television. Her voice had gathered a rhythm now, deliberate and commanding. Colbert threw another jab, this time invoking the January chaos, hoping to corner her into defending the indefensible. But Karoline paused. I condemn political violence, period, she said. But I also condemn the culture that says only certain voices deserve to be heard. You want to call out hypocrisy? Start with your own side too. That line hit like a hammer. The crowd erupted, not entirely in support, not entirely against, but loud, confused, stirred. Colbert looked visibly rattled now. This wasn't a guest. This was a reckoning. The control room hesitated. Should they cut to commercial? Should they let it ride? And Karoline? She sat upright, spine straight, eyes locked on the host. She was just getting started. The show's control room was on the verge of panic. Producers waved silently behind the camera, their hand signals a frantic ballet of indecision. Cut or keep it rolling. This wasn't a political interview anymore. This was a detonation. Stephen, Colbert's team had never seen him quite like this. Still sharp, still standing, but clearly stunned by the blowback of inviting Karoline Leavitt onto the stage. She wasn't just pushing back. She was flipping the entire format of late-night commentary on its head. The balance of power had shifted, and everyone in the room could feel it. Karoline leaned forward, her tone now more measured, but far from softened. You know what bothers me most, Stephen? She said, voice steady. It's not that we disagree. It's that you don't even pretend to listen. You caricature your opposition, reduce people into punchlines, and expect applause for it. That's not comedy. That's cowardice with a laugh track, gasps. Audible ones. Colbert opened his mouth to respond, but she wasn't finished. You invited me here thinking you'd have the final word. That I'd trip up. That I'd be intimidated by the crowd, or your jokes, or your reputation. But here's what you forgot. Some of us don't care about applause. Some of us care about the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it is. It was a direct challenge, and Colbert knew it. This wasn't just about him. It was about the system he represented, the insulated echo chamber media machine that dismissed opposing views not through dialogue, but through derision. Karoline, he finally said, his voice tight. I do listen, but I also call out what I think is wrong. And I think your political movement is built on a foundation of fear and falsehood. Karoline didn't flinch. You're right to call out falsehoods, she said. But fear, that's projection. What you call fear is people demanding to be heard, seen, and respected. You don't have to agree with them, but you have to acknowledge their right to exist in the conversation. The audience didn't know how to react. Applause flickered. Booing threatened. It was chaos restrained only by disbelief. Everyone had expected Karoline to be thrown off balance. Instead, she had taken the host's own platform and turned it into a mirror. Colbert fell silent for a beat, then reached for a pivot. So what's your solution then? You come on here, criticize the format, call out my jokes. What do you want instead? Karoline sat back, her tone sharp now. I want accountability, she said. From everyone. That includes the people I support. But it especially includes the people with the power to shape narratives, to ridicule opposition, to call themselves truth-tellers while living behind selective edits and cherry-picked outrage. At that moment, the audience shifted again. It was no longer about partisanship. It was about principle. And suddenly, the audience wasn't sure who to root for. Colbert, trying to regain footing, smirked again. But this time it looked less like confidence and more like armor. He tried for levity, reaching for a one-liner, to ease the tension. Well, I guess we can agree to disagree. Or at least agree that we're not agreeing. A few scattered laughs. Mostly awkward, but Karoline didn't let it go. This is not a debate you get to end with a punchline, she said. Not when millions of people feel like they've been mocked for simply asking questions. The room froze. And then something unexpected happened. One member of the audience stood, applauding. Alone at first. Then another. And another. It wasn't a standing ovation. It was something rawer, realer. People weren't cheering a victory. They were responding to the authenticity of the confrontation. Two worlds colliding on live television, the studio unable to contain the fallout. Colbert sat there, blinking. Karoline didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply turned to the crowd, nodded once, and waited for the cameras to roll again. This wasn't a triumph built on snark. It was a reckoning built on truth, and it wasn't over yet. The moment the segment cut to commercial, the studio was thrown into a frenzy behind the scenes. Staff moved quickly but silently, like people who had just witnessed something irreversible. The cameras may have stopped rolling, but the energy hadn't. It hung in the air, thick and palpable, the kind that doesn't dissipate with time. It simmers. Karoline Leavitt stepped off the stage, flanked by two assistants, her heels clicking against the floor with a rhythm of finality. She didn't look angry. She didn't look proud. She looked like someone who had just torn through an illusion and was waiting to see what remained on the other side. Stephen Colbert didn't leave his chair. He sat motionless, eyes fixed on the floor in front of him, fingers tapping the side of his coffee mug. For all his years in comedy and politics, this was something new, something different. He had always controlled the narrative, until now. As the episode aired just hours later, social media erupted. Clips spread like wildfire, ripped from live streams, overlaid with commentary, slowed down, chopped, analyzed frame by frame. No spin could contain it. The headline moments were too raw. She shut him down. She humiliated him. She exposed the format. But others took Colbert's side, calling Karoline dangerous, accusing her of disrespecting the platform, of bulldozing nuance for the sake of a headline. The debate ignited instantly, but something about this moment felt less like performance and more like paradigm shift. Journalists scrambled to make sense of what had happened. Op-eds poured in from both sides. Some called it a masterclass in deflection. Others, a rare act of unscripted honesty in a medium starved for it. What none of them could deny, though, was the reaction from the public. Polls showed a sharp uptick in Karoline Leavitt's name recognition overnight. Her social media followers doubled within 24 hours. News programs tried booking her, but she declined them all. She had said what needed to be said, and she wasn't interested in repeating it for a roundtable of pundits. Meanwhile, Colbert's team held emergency meetings. How had this gone so far off script? Was it a failure of preparation? A misread of the guest? Or something deeper? Something broken in the very formula that had made the show successful for so long? But the tension didn't stay confined to television or Twitter. It spilled into Congress, where lawmakers on both sides began referencing the exchange in hearings, sound bites, and debates. Karoline had become more than a guest. She had become a symbol. And then came the press conference. 3 days after the episode aired, Karoline stood before a swarm of reporters. No stage, no lights, no banter, just a microphone and a cold Washington breeze. "I'm not here to feud with Stephen Colbert," she began. "I'm here to challenge the idea that confrontation must be hostile, that truth must be packaged in sarcasm, and that those who speak against the crowd must be silenced." Reporters fired questions at her. Would she run for higher office? Was this a publicity stunt? Did she regret anything? She answered none directly. "I said what I meant," she said. "And if that's uncomfortable, maybe we should ask why. We've built platforms that are more interested in applause than understanding." Back in New York, Colbert addressed the controversy on his next show. He tried to joke through it. "Apparently, I got fact-checked in real time," he quipped. But the laughter was nervous, guarded. He paused, then took a rare step outside his usual role. "Look," he said seriously, "we bring people on this show because we believe in conversation. I disagreed with a lot of what Karoline said, but I respect the fact that she came here and didn't play the game. Maybe we need more of that." It was a gesture of humility, but the damage, or transformation, was already done. In the days that followed, invitations began arriving at Karoline's office. University speaking gigs, town halls, panels on media responsibility. She hadn't planned to become the face of something larger, but that's how movements begin. Unintentionally, in moments of unrehearsed courage. And even those who disliked her couldn't help but ask the question, what happens when a carefully controlled platform gets shaken by an unexpected dose of truth? Because the next time someone stepped onto that stage, the rules would be different. The laughter would be more cautious. The host, more aware. The audience, more divided. Karoline Leavitt had not just responded. She had redrawn the boundaries. Days turned to weeks. And what had once been considered a viral anomaly now started to settle in as a turning point. Karoline Leavitt was no longer just a rising voice in the political landscape. She was the spark that reignited a debate long overdue. What did accountability look like in modern media? Who truly held the power when the script was flipped on live television? As invitations kept pouring in, Karoline became more selective. She wasn't interested in celebrity. Nor did she craved the spotlight for the sake of it. What she wanted, what she demanded, was substance, and that meant confronting uncomfortable truths, whether in front of a congressional panel or in a television studio. She accepted one interview months after the Colbert confrontation. Not with a traditional network, but with an independent outlet known for long-form, unedited conversations. No flashy graphics, no laugh track, no staged introductions, just a raw conversation, and it was there, in that unfiltered format, that Karoline laid out what had changed. "Too many of us are afraid of being misunderstood," she said, her voice steady. "So we sanitize our thoughts, we rehearse our truths. I walked onto that stage not to perform, but to push back. And when you do that in a space built for mockery, you either crumble or you change the room." The host asked if she ever second-guessed that decision, knowing the backlash, the polarization, the doors that might close. Karoline didn't hesitate. "Every time you trade truth for comfort, you sell a piece of your voice. I'm done making. that trade. Meanwhile, the networks had begun to adjust. Hosts watched what happened on Colbert's stage with new eyes. Producers started revisiting the idea of unscripted engagement. Some welcomed the shift, others resisted. But the ripple had been created, and it was reaching farther than anyone expected. Even Stephen Colbert, whose reputation had been dented, but not destroyed, responded by subtly shifting his tone. More guests who disagreed with him were invited. More moments of real pushback were allowed to air without a cut to commercial. Viewers noticed. Some applauded the maturity. Others missed the comfort of the old format, but change never pleases everyone. What it does do, though, is leave a mark. And Karoline's mark was undeniable. As election season neared, her name began appearing on shortlists. Not for the presidency, but for cabinet roles, state leadership, or party leadership positions. She was young, she was bold, and perhaps most importantly, she had proven she could face fire and still speak clearly. The story wasn't just about the insult anymore. It wasn't just about a TV host caught off guard or a guest refusing to stay polite. It was about a country wrestling with itself, about media, about power, about authenticity. And Jasmine Crockett? She had been watching too. Though not part of that original confrontation, she too had been pushing back in her own way. In hearings, in interviews, in legal circles. When asked about Karoline's moment, she simply said, "Any woman who refuses to shrink in the face of ridicule is already doing something revolutionary. Two voices, two approaches, one unshakable truth. Silence, when expected, can be the loudest rebellion." In the end, what Karoline Leavitt did wasn't just shut down an insult. She turned a televised exchange into a national reckoning. And in doing so, she didn't just change the conversation. She changed the rules of the room.